Kierkegaard in his day made trouble against what would now be more easily referred to as the internet. He truly disliked the newspaper and the press, or more precisely what he called disproportionate communication. He saw that this form of communication was preached through the press and other forms of modernizing communication. He saw it as problematic because it would do away with the conversational code of human interaction, the code of communication which not only promotes a meaning but also regulates it, so that specific desired meaning is maintained for the security of correct interpretation and coherent understanding. This is actually quite relatable to Wittgenstein's idea of private language and the subjective interpretation of the meaning of words. Therefore, what would be the best way to increase this absurdity? Kierkegaard called it the talking tube, to invent a talking tube which could be heard all over the land. I quote, "Suppose someone invented an instrument, a convenient little talking tube, which could be heard all over the land. I wonder if the police would not forbid it, fearing that the whole country would become mentally deranged if it were used." End quote. This instrument, this talking tube, acts in the nature of a megaphone. When used, everyone, as far as sound travels, can hear it. But what has become is that we all have this megaphone. Thus, in a sea of noise, we all scream our thoughts into the open air for everyone to hear. Never have we lived in a time where our thoughts can travel like a viral infection, yet only the most infective thoughts last a lifetime, and those usually are the ones which become the status quo, preached by the most successful profiles, corporations, and institutions on the internet or in the press. But nevertheless, the noise is still more noticeable than any message ever heard. Due to the difficulty of holding a convenient communication through the mass hysteric talking tube, many of such a message is just nothing but noise itself. A consistent irritation, irrelevance, and annoyance. In the modern world, for example, we can refer this to the embarrassing degeneracy of celebrity tabloids in superfluous readings, or for Kierkegaard, the following. I quote, "The daily press is the evil principle of the modern world, and time will only serve to disclose this fact with great clearness. The capacity of the newspaper for degeneration is sophistically without limit, since it can always sink lower and lower in its choice of readers. At last it will stir up all those dregs of humanity which no state or government can control." End quote. With that said, you could easily swap out daily press with any social media site, internet-related corporation or broadcasting, and can most certainly agree that over time it has made itself more evident with greater and greater clearness. Think of memes, for example. With the use of real-life pictures and even identities, the collective message that preaches through their use can only be done by sacrificing the image of an individual, so that they can be made into a transferable, mimetic archetype for modern human expression. The collective group, in a way, take away the integrity of the individual for a perceived higher purpose, which is actually the definition of a sacrifice. What you have left is a transferable commodity, which could be said at times resides in a form of nihilistic sarcasm. But to get to the point, the individual's life is ruined by being turned into some kind of degenerate comedy for the masses. And just like Kierkegaard's talking tube, it spreads to every crevice of the world. This is very relatable to what Kierkegaard writes in the following, saying, I quote, "Attention must be directed to the disproportion in the medium of communication itself. For example, by telling in print of a young woman given a full name, and this telling is of course the truth, that she has bought a new dress, and this is assumed to be true, and by repeating this a few times, the girl can be made miserable for her whole life. And one single person can bring this about in 5 minutes. And why? Because the press, the daily press, is a disproportionate medium of communication." End quote. Dostoevsky once said, "Man only does vile things because he doesn't know his own interests." But I don't really agree with that in this sense completely. It's a bit too extreme. It would seem though that through anonymity, a few or many standards seem to drop which allow this to happen. The anonymity, because it is a glaze, veil or blockage over reality, the full experience of reality which comes along with responsibility becomes diluted and weakened. There isn't the usual necessary desire for conviction as once before, no strength towards a seriousness in nature. And this is what may break down some of these values which are in place when living in a completely experienced reality, instead of people who put themselves in an anonymous state, where responsibility is faded, or so they believe. An example where I think anonymity breaks down conviction is by looking at emojis. The emojis are supposed to be representations of the person who is anonymous, of real expression. So the real expression is replaced with a representation of expression. And as far as conviction goes, human expression is weakened, even to the point where you have people who use emojis to take away their own humanity. And funnily enough, Kierkegaard actually picked up on this, that things were being made to reduce human conviction. I quote, "In Germany, there are even handbooks for lovers. So it will probably end with lovers being able to sit and speak anonymously to each other. There are handbooks on everything, and generally speaking, education soon will consist of knowing letter perfect a larger or smaller compendium of observations from such handbooks, and one will excel in proportion to his skill in pulling out the particular one, just as the typesetter picks out letters." End quote. In this sense, you are allowing it to express yourself for you, to depersonalize and desensitize your not-so-personal expressions. Not only that, but Kierkegaard also points towards creativity becoming lost. A societal demand of having to wear disciplined masks takes away any ability for creativity, but keeps you in a rigid structure of what the commander demands of you. Any form of supposed self-expression through emoji, meme, hashtag, etc. is for Kierkegaard the action of acting with anonymous communication. This communication is not true to your character, but any emoji, hashtag or internet symbol used is a rented expression from its primary owner, and thus makes you anonymous, void of individuality. These trendy tricks from the internet age have turned into accidental habits through the modern age of communication. But Kierkegaard writes about the important virtues within writing and communication, saying, I quote, "The very soul of a writer should go into his style, and a man puts his whole personality into the style of his conversation. Nowadays, one can talk with anyone, and it must be admitted that people's opinions are exceedingly sensible, yet the conversation leaves one with the impression of having talked to an anonymity." If you enjoyed this video and found it insightful, make sure to like, subscribe and comment down below to get involved in discussion. Talking about discussion, you can find a link to the Thoughts on Thinking Facebook group down below, so make sure to join if you want to get involved in conversations about philosophy, sociology, psychology and literature. Make sure to follow my social media such as Instagram and Twitter to keep up to date with everything that is going on, and also Patreon, where you can donate a minimum of $2. Lastly, a quick shout out to all my patrons. Thank you to Daniel Kazmi, The Truthism, Noah Shahad, John, Bizham, Richard, Walter, Mark Smith, Maggie DC, Dari, Nikki, Sarah, J. Aaron C, Anders and James for supporting me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video.